The 19th century in Western Europe and North America saw the beginning of a process, today being completed by 20th century corporate capitalism, by which every tradition which has previously mediated between man and nature was broken. Before this rupture, animals constituted the first circle of what surrounded man. Perhaps that already suggests too great a distance. They were with man at the center of his world. Such centrality was, of course, economic and productive. Whatever the changes in productive means and social organization, men depended upon animals for food, work, transport, clothing. Yet to suppose that animals first entered the human imagination as meat or leather or horn is to project a 19th century attitude backwards across the millennia. Animals first entered the imagination as messengers and promises. For example, the domestication of cattle did not begin as a simple prospect of milk and meat. Cattle had magical functions, sometimes oracular, sometimes sacrificial, and the choice of a given species as magical, tameable, and alimentary was originally determined by the habits, proximity, and invitation of the animal in question. White ox, good is my mother. And we, the people of my sister, the people of Nerio bull, friend, great ox of the spreading horns, which ever bellows amid the herd, ox of the son of bull Maloa. The newer description of the modes of livelihood and political institutions of a Nilotic people by Evans Pritchard. Animals are born, are sentient, and are mortal. In these things they resemble man. In their superficial anatomy, less in their deep anatomy, in their habits, in their time, in their physical capacities, they differ from man. They are both like and unlike. We know what animals do and what beaver and bears and salmon and other creatures need, because once our men were married to them and they acquired this knowledge from their animal wives. Hawaiian Indians quoted by Levi-Strauss in The Savage Mind. The eyes of an animal when they consider a man are attentive and wary. The same animal may well look at other species in the same way. He does not reserve a special look for man. But by no other species except man will the animal's look be recognized as familiar. Other animals are held by the look. Man becomes aware of himself returning the look. The animal scrutinizes him across a narrow abyss of non-comprehension. This is why the man can surprise the animal. Yet the animal, even if domesticated, can also surprise the man. The man, too, is looking across a similar but not identical abyss of non-comprehension. And this is so wherever he looks. He is always looking across ignorance and fear. And so, when he is being seen by the animal, he is being seen as his surroundings are seen by him. His recognition of this is what makes the look of the animal familiar, and yet the animal is distinct and can never be confused with man. Thus, a power is ascribed to the animal, comparable with human power but never coinciding with it. The animal has secrets which, unlike the secrets of caves, mountains, seas, are specifically addressed to man. The relation may become clearer by comparing the look of an animal with the look of another man. Between two men, the two abysses are, in principle, bridged by language. Even if the encounter is hostile and no words are used, even if the two speak different languages, the existence of language allows that at least one of them, if not both mutually, is confirmed by the other. Language allows men to reckon with each other as with themselves. In the confirmation made possible by language, human ignorance and fear may also be confirmed. Whereas in animals, fear is a response to signal. In men, it is endemic. No animal confirms man, either positively or negatively. The animal can be killed and eaten so that its energy is added to that which the hunter already possesses. The animal can be tamed so that it supplies and works for the peasant. But always its lack of common language, its silence, guarantees its distance, its distinctness, its exclusion from and of man. Just because of this distinctness, however, an animal's life, never to be confused with a man's, can be seen to run parallel to his. Only in death do the two parallel lines converge, and after death, perhaps, cross over to become parallel again. Hence the widespread belief in the transmigration of souls. With their parallel lives, animals offer man a companionship which is different from any offered by human exchange. Different because it is a companionship offered to the loneliness of man as a species. Such an unspeaking companionship was felt to be so equal that often one finds the conviction that it was man who lacked the capacity to speak with animals. Hence the stories and legends of exceptional beings, like Orpheus, who could talk with animals in their own language. What were the secrets of the animal's likeness with and unlikeness from man? The secrets whose existence man recognized as soon as he intercepted an animal's look. In one sense, the whole of anthropology, concerned with the passage from nature to culture, is an answer to that question. But there is also a general answer. All the secrets were about animals as an intercession between man and his origin. Darwin's evolutionary theory, indelibly stamped as it is with the marks of the European 19th century, nevertheless belongs to a tradition almost as old as man himself. Animals interceded between man and their origin because they were both like and unlike man. Animals came from over the horizon. They belonged there and here. Likewise, they were mortal and immortal. An animal's blood flowed like human blood, but its species was undying, and each lion was lion, each ox was ox. This may be the first existential dualism was reflected in the treatment of animals. They were subjected and worshipped, bred and sacrificed. Today, the vestiges of this dualism remain among those who live intimately with and depend upon animals. A peasant becomes fond of his pig and is glad to salt away its pork. What is significant and is so difficult for the urban stranger to understand is that the two statements in that sentence are connected by an and not by a but. The parallelism of their similar/dissimilar lives allowed animals to provoke some of the first questions and offer answers. The first subject matter for painting was animal. Probably the first paint was animal blood. Prior to that, it is not unreasonable to suppose that the first metaphor was animal. Rousseau, in his essay on the origins of languages, maintained that language itself began with metaphor. As emotions were the first motives which induced man to speak, his first utterances were tropes, metaphors. Figurative language was the first to be born. Proper meanings were the last to be found. If the first metaphor was animal, it was because the essential relation between man and animal was metaphoric. Within that relation, what the two terms, man and animal, shared in common revealed what differentiated them, and vice versa. In his book on totemism, Lévi-Strauss comments on Rousseau's reasoning. It is because man originally felt himself identical to all those like him, among which, as Rousseau explicitly says, we must include animals, that he came to acquire the capacity to distinguish himself as he distinguishes them, to use the diversity of species for conceptual support for social differentiation. To accept Rousseau's explanation of the origins of languages, of course, to beg certain questions. What was the minimal social organization necessary for the breakthrough of language? Yet no search for origin can ever be fully satisfied. The intercession of animals in that search was so common precisely because animals remain ambiguous. All theories of ultimate origin are only ways of better defining what followed. Those who disagree with Rousseau are contesting a view of man, not a historical fact. What we are trying to define, because the experience is almost lost, is the universal use of animal signs for charting the experience of the world. Animals were seen in 8 out of 12 signs of the zodiac. Among the Greeks, the sign of each of the 12 hours of the day was an animal. The first, a cat, the last, a crocodile. The Hindus envisaged the earth being carried on the back of an elephant, and the elephant on a tortoise. For the Nur of the southern Sudan, see Roy Willis's Man and Beast, all creatures, including man, originally lived together in fellowship in one camp. Dissension began after Fox persuaded Mongoose to throw a club into Elephant's face. A quarrel ensued and the animal separated. Each went its own way and began to live as they now are and to kill each other. Stomach, which at first lived a life of its own in the bush, entered into man so that now he is always hungry. The sexual organs, which had also been separate, attached themselves to men and women, causing them to desire one another constantly. Elephant taught man how to pound millet so that now he satisfies his hunger only by ceaseless labor. Mouse taught man to beget and women to bear, and dog brought fire to man. The examples are endless. Everywhere animals offered explanations, or more precisely, lent their name or character to a quality, which, like all qualities, was, in its essence, mysterious. What distinguished man from animals was the human capacity for symbolic thought, the capacity which was inseparable from the development of language in which words were not mere signals, but signifiers of something other than themselves. Yet the first symbols were animals. What distinguished men from animals was born of their relationship with them. The Iliad is one of the earliest texts available to us, and in it the use of metaphor still reveals the proximity of man and animal, the proximity from which metaphor itself arose. Homer describes the death of a soldier on the battlefield, and then the death of a horse. Both deaths are equally transparent to Homer's eyes. There is no more refraction in one case than the other. Meanwhile, Idomeneus struck Erymas on the mouth with his relentless bronze. The metal point of the spear passed right through the lower part of his skull, under the brain, and smashed the white bones. His teeth were shattered, both his eyes were filled with blood, and he spurted blood through his nostrils and his gaping mouth. Then the black cloud of death descended on him. That was a man. 3 pages further on, it is a horse who falls. Sarpedon, casting second with his shining spear, missed Patroclus, but struck his horse Pedasus on the right shoulder. The horse whinnied in the throes of death, then fell down in the dust, and with a great sigh gave up his life. That was animal. Book 17 of the Iliad opens with Menelaus standing over the corpse of Patroclus to prevent the Trojans stripping it. Here Homer uses animals as metaphoric references to convey with irony or admiration the excessive or superlative qualities of different moments. Without the example of animals, such moments would have remained indescribable. Menelaus bestrode his body like a fretful mother cow standing over the first calf she has brought into the world. A Trojan threatens him, and ironically, Menelaus shouts out to Zeus, "Have you ever seen such arrogance?" We know the courage of the panther and the lion, and the fierce wild boar, the most high-spirited and self-reliant beast of all, but that, it seems, is nothing to the prowess of these sons of Panthos. Menelaus then kills the Trojan who threatened him, and nobody dares approach him. He was like a mountain lion who believes in his own strength and pounces on the finest heifer in a grazing herd. He breaks her neck with his powerful jaws, and then he tears her to pieces and devours her blood and entrails, while all around him the herdsmen and their dogs create a din but keep their distance. They are heartily scared of him, and nothing would induce them to close in. Centuries after Homer, Aristotle, in his History of Animals, the first major scientific work on the subject, systematizes the comparative relation of man and animal. In the great majority of animals there are traces of physical qualities and attitudes, which qualities are more markedly differentiated in the case of human beings. For just as we pointed out resemblances in the physical organs, so in a number of animals we observe gentleness and fierceness, mildness or cross-temper, courage or timidity, fear or confidence, high spirits or low cunning, and with regard to intelligence, something akin to sagacity. Some of these qualities in man, as compared with the corresponding qualities in animals, differ only quantitatively. That is to say, man has more or less of this quality, and an animal has more or less of some other. Other qualities in man are represented by analogous and not identical qualities. For example, just as in man we find knowledge, wisdom, and sagacity, so in certain animals there exists some other natural potentiality akin to these. The truth of this statement will be the more clearly apprehended if we have regard to the phenomena of childhood. For in children we observe the traces and seeds of what will one day be settled psychological habits. Though psychologically, a child hardly differs for the time being from an animal. To most modern educated readers, this passage, I think, will seem noble but too anthropomorphic. Gentleness, cross-temper, sagacity, they would argue, are not moral qualities which can be ascribed to animals, and the behaviorists would support this objection. Until the 19th century, however, anthropomorphism was integral to the relation between man and animal, and was an expression of their proximity. Anthropomorphism was the residue of the continuous use of animal metaphor. In the last 2 centuries, animals have gradually disappeared. Today we live without them. And in this new solitude, anthropomorphism makes us doubly uneasy. The decisive theoretical break came with Descartes. Descartes internalized, within man, the dualism implicit in the human relation to animals. In dividing absolutely body from soul, he bequeathed the body to the laws of physics and mechanics, and since animals were soulless, the animal was reduced to the model of a machine. The consequences of Descartes' break followed only slowly. A century later, the great zoologist Buffon, although accepting and using the model of the machine in order to classify animals and their capacities, nevertheless displays a tenderness towards animals which temporarily reinstates them as companions. This tenderness is half envious. What man has to do in order to transcend the animal, to transcend the mechanical within himself, and what his unique spirituality leads to, is often anguish. And so, by comparison and despite the model of the machine, the animal seems to him to enjoy a kind of innocence. The animal has been emptied of experience and secrets, and this new invented innocence begins to provoke in man a kind of nostalgia. For the first time, animals are placed in a receding past. Buffon, writing on the beaver, says this: "To the same degree as man has raised himself above the state of nature, animals have fallen below it, conquered and turned into slaves, or treated as rebels and scattered by force. Their societies have faded away, their industry has become unproductive, their tentative arts have disappeared. Each species has lost its general qualities, all of them retaining only their distinct capacities, developed in some by example, imitation, education, and in others, by fear and necessity during the constant watch for survival. What visions and plans can these soulless slaves have, these relics of the past without power? Only vestiges of their once marvelous industry remain in far deserted places, unknown to man for centuries, where each species freely used its natural capacities and perfected them in peace within a lasting community. The beavers are perhaps the only remaining example, the last monument to that animal intelligence. Although such nostalgia towards animals was an 18th century invention, countless productive inventions were still necessary. The railway, electricity, the conveyor belt, the canning industry, the motor car, chemical fertilizers, before animals could be marginalized. During the 20th century, the internal combustion engine displaced draft animals in streets and factories. Cities, growing at an ever-increasing rate, transformed the surrounding countryside into suburbs where field animals, wild or domesticated, became rare. The commercial exploitation of certain species, bison, tigers, reindeer, has rendered them almost extinct. Such wildlife as remains is increasingly confined to national parks and game reserves. Eventually, Descartes' model was surpassed. In the first stages of the Industrial Revolution, animals were used as machines, as also were children. Later, in the so-called post-industrial societies, they are treated as raw material. Animals required for food are processed like manufactured commodities. Another giant plant, now under development in North Carolina, will cover a total of 150,000 hectares, but will employ only 1,000 people, one for every 15 hectares. Grains will be sown, nurtured, and harvested by machines, including airplanes. They will be fed to the 50,000 cattle and hogs. Those animals will never touch the ground. They will be bred, suckled, and fed to maturity in specially designed pens. Susan George's How the Other Half Dies. This reduction of the animal, which has a theoretical as well as economic history, is part of the same process as that by which men have been reduced to isolated productive and consuming units. Indeed, during this period, an approach to animals often prefigured an approach to man. The mechanical view of the animal's work capacity was later applied to that of workers. F. W. Taylor, who developed the Taylorism of time-motion studies and scientific management of industry, proposed that work must be so stupid and so phlegmatic that he, the worker, more nearly resembles in his mental makeup the ox than any other type, Nearly all modern techniques of social conditioning were first established with animal experiments, as were also the methods of so-called intelligence testing. Today, behaviorists, like Skinner, imprison the very concept of man within the limits of what they conclude from their artificial tests with animals. Is there not one way in which animals, instead of disappearing, continue to multiply? Never have there been so many household pets as are to be found today in the cities of the richest countries. In the United States, it is estimated that there are at least 40 million dogs, 40 million cats, 15 million cage birds, and 10 million other pets. In the past, families of all classes kept domestic animals because they served a useful purpose: guard dogs, hunting dogs, mice-killing cats, and so on. The practice of keeping animals regardless of their usefulness, the keeping exactly of pets. In the 16th century, the word usually referred to a lamb raised by hand, is a modern innovation, and on the social scale on which it exists today, is unique. It is part of that universal but personal withdrawal into the private small family unit, decorated or furnished with mementos from the outside world, which is such a distinguishing feature of consumer societies. The small family living unit lacks space, earth, other animals, seasons, natural temperatures, and so on. The pet is either sterilized or sexually isolated, extremely limited in its exercise, deprived of almost all other animal contact, and fed with artificial foods. This is the material process which lies behind the truism that pets come to resemble their masters or mistresses. They are creatures of their owner's way of life. Equally important is the way the average owner regards his pet. Children are, briefly, somewhat different. The pet completes him, offering responses to aspects of his character which would otherwise remain unconfirmed. He can be to his pet what he is not to anybody or anything else. Furthermore, the pet can be conditioned to react as though it too recognizes this. The pet offers its owner a mirror to a part that is otherwise never reflected. But, since in this relationship the autonomy of both parties has been lost, the owner has become the special man, he is only to his pet, and the animal has become dependent on its owner for every physical need. The parallelism of their separate lives has been destroyed. The cultural marginalization of animals is, of course, a more complex process than their physical marginalization. The animals of the mind cannot be so easily dispersed. Sayings, dreams, games, stories, superstitions, the language itself recall them. The animals of the mind, instead of being dispersed, have been co-opted into other categories so that the category animal has lost its central importance. Mostly, they have been co-opted into the family and into the spectacle. Those co-opted into the family somewhat resemble pets, but having no physical needs or limitations as pets do, they can be totally transformed into human puppets. The books and drawings of Beatrix Potter are an early example. All the animal productions of the Disney industry are a more recent and extreme one. In such works, the pettiness of current social practices is universalized by being projected onto the animal kingdom. The following dialogue between Donald Duck and his nephews is eloquent enough. Donald: Man, what a day! What a perfect day for fishing, boating, dating, or picnicking. Only I can't do any of these things. NTHDW. Why not, Unca Donald? What's holding you back? Donald: The bread of life, boys. As usual, I'm broke, and it's cons till payday. NPHEW. You could take a walk, Unca Donald. Go birdwatching. Donald: Groan. I may have to. But first, I'll wait for the mailman. He may bring something good news-wise. NPHW. Like a check from an unknown relative in Moneyville. Their physical features apart, these animals have been absorbed into the so-called silent majority. The animals transformed into spectacle have disappeared in another way. In the windows of bookshops at Christmas, a third of the volumes on display are animal picture books, baby owls or giraffes. The camera fixes them in a domain which, although entirely visible to the camera, will never be entered by the spectator. All animals appear like fish seen through the plate glass of an aquarium. The reasons for this are both technical and ideological. Technically, the devices used to obtain ever more arresting images. hidden cameras, telescopic lenses, flashlights, remote controls, and so on, combine to produce pictures which carry with them numerous indications of their normal invisibility. The images exist thanks only to the existence of a technical clairvoyance. A recent, very well-produced book of animal photographs, La Fête Sauvage by Frédéric Rossif, announces in its preface, each of these pictures lasted in real time less than 0.03 of a second. They are far beyond the capacity of the human eye. What we see here is something never before seen, because it is totally invisible. In the accompanying ideology, animals are always the observed. The fact that they can observe us has lost all significance. They are the objects of our ever-extending knowledge. What we know about them is an index of our power, and thus an index of what separates us from them. The more we know, the further away they are. Yet in the same ideology, as Lukács points out in History and Class Consciousness, nature is also a value concept, a value opposed to the social institutions which strip man of his natural essence and imprison him. Nature thereby acquires the meaning of what has grown organically, what was not created by man. In contrast to the artificial structures of human civilization, at the same time it can be understood as that aspect of human inwardness which has remained natural, or at least tends or longs to become natural once more. According to this view of nature, the life of a wild animal becomes an ideal internalized as a feeling surrounding a repressed desire. The image of a wild animal becomes the starting point of a daydream, a point from which the daydreamer departs with his back turned. The degree of confusion involved is illustrated by the following news story. London housewife Barbara Carter won a Grant-a-Wish charity contest and said she wanted to kiss and cuddle a lion. Wednesday night, she was in a hospital in shock and with throat wounds. Mrs. Carter, 46, was taken to the Lions compound of the safari park at Bedley Wednesday. As she bent forward to stroke the lioness, Suki It pounced and dragged her to the ground. Wardens later said, "We seem to have made a bad error of judgment. We have always regarded the lioness as perfectly safe." The treatment of animals in 19th century Romantic painting was already an acknowledgement of their impending disappearance. The images are of animals receding into a wildness that existed only in the imagination. There was, however, one 19th century artist who was obsessed by the transformation about to take place, and whose work was an uncanny illustration of it. Granville published his Public and Private Life of Animals in installments between 1840 and 1842. At first sight, Granville's animals dressed up and performing as men and women appear to belong to the old tradition, whereby a person is portrayed as an animal so as to reveal more clearly an aspect of his or her character. The device was like putting on a mask, but its function was to unmask. The animal represents the apogee of the character trait in question. The lion, absolute courage. The hare, lechery. The animal once lived near the origin of the quality. It was through the animal that the quality first became recognizable, and so the animal lends it his name. But as one goes on looking at Granville's engravings, one becomes aware that the shock which they convey derives in fact from the opposite movement to that which one first assumed. These animals are not being borrowed to explain people, nothing is being unmasked. On the contrary, Kanikaza's, these animals have become prisoners of a human/social situation into which they have been press-ganged. The vulture as landlord is more dreadfully rapacious than he is as a bird. The crocodiles at dinner are greedier at the table than they are in the river. Here, animals are not being used as reminders of origin or as moral metaphors. They are being used en masse to people situations. The movement that ends with the banality of Disney began as a disturbing, prophetic dream in the work of Granville. The dogs in Granville's engraving of the dog pound are in no way canine. They have dogs' faces, but what they are suffering is imprisonment like men. The Bear is a Good Father shows a bear dejectedly pulling a pram like any other human breadwinner. Granville's first volume ends with the words, "Good night then, dear reader. Go home, lock your cage well, sleep tight and have pleasant dreams. Until tomorrow." Animals and populace are becoming synonymous. which is to say, the animals are fading away. A later Granville drawing, entitled The Animals Entering the Steam Ark, is explicit. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, Noah's Ark was the first ordered assembly of animals and man. The assembly is now over. Granville shows us the great departure. On a quayside, a long queue of different species is filing slowly away, their backs towards us. Their postures suggest all the last-minute doubts of emigrants. In the distance is a ramp by which the first have already entered the 19th century ark, which is like an American steamboat. The bear, the lion, the donkey, the camel, the cock, the fox, exeunt. About 1867, according to the London Zoo Guide, a music hall artist called the Great Vance sang a song called Walking in the Zoo is the okay thing to do, and the word zoo came into everyday use. London Zoo also brought the word jumbo into the English language. Jumbo was an African elephant of mammoth size, who lived at the zoo between 1865 and 1882. Queen Victoria took an interest in him, and eventually he ended his days as the star of the famous Barnum Circus, which traveled through America, his name living on to describe things of giant proportions. Public zoos came into existence at the beginning of the period which was to see the disappearance of animals from daily life. The zoo to which people go to meet animals, to observe them, to see them, is in fact a monument to the impossibility of such encounters. Modern zoos are an epitaph to a relationship which was as old as man. They are not seen as such because the wrong questions have been addressed to zoos. When they were founded, the London Zoo in 1828, the Jardin des Plantes in 1793, the Berlin Zoo in 1844, they brought considerable prestige to the national capitals. The prestige was not so different from that which had accrued to the private royal menageries. These menageries, along with gold plate, architecture, orchestras, players, furnishings, dwarfs, acrobats, uniforms, horses, art and food, had been demonstrations of an emperor's or king's power and wealth. Likewise, in the 19th century, public zoos were an endorsement of modern colonial power. The capturing of the animals was a symbolic representation of the conquest of all distant and exotic lands. Explorers proved their patriotism by sending home a tiger or an elephant. The gift of an exotic animal to the Metropolitan Zoo became a token in subservient diplomatic relations. Yet, like every other 19th century public institution, the zoo, however supportive of the ideology of imperialism, had to claim an independent and civic function. The claim was that it was another kind of museum, whose purpose was to further knowledge and public enlightenment. And so the first questions asked of zoos belonged to natural history. It was then thought possible to study the natural life of animals even in such unnatural conditions. A century later, more sophisticated zoologists such as Konrad Lorenz asked behavioristic and ethological questions, the claimed purpose of which was to discover more about the springs of human action through the study of animals under experimental conditions. Meanwhile, millions visited the zoos each year out of a curiosity which was both so large, so vague, and so personal that it is hard to express in a single question. Today in France, 22 million people visit the 200 zoos each year. A high proportion of the visitors were and are children. Children in the industrialized world are surrounded by animal imagery, toys, cartoons, pictures, decorations of every sort. No other source of imagery can begin to compete with that of animals. The apparently spontaneous interest that children have in animals might lead one to suppose that this has always been the case. Certainly, some of the earliest toys, when toys were unknown to the vast majority of the population, were animal. Equally, children's games all over the world include real or pretended animals. Yet it was not until the 19th century that reproductions of animals became a regular part of the decor of middle-class childhoods. And then in this century, with the advent of vast display and selling systems like Disney's of all childhoods. In the preceding centuries, the proportion of toys which were animal was small, and these did not pretend to realism, but were symbolic. The difference was that between a traditional hobby horse and a rocking horse, the first, was merely a stick with a rudimentary head, which children rode like a broom handle. The second was an elaborate reproduction of a horse, painted realistically, with real reins of leather, a real mane of hair, and designed movement to resemble that of a horse galloping. The rocking horse was a 19th century invention. This new demand for verisimilitude in animal toys led to different methods of manufacture. The first stuffed animals were produced, and the most expensive were covered with real animal skin, usually the skin of stillborn calves. The same period saw the appearance of soft animals, bears, tigers, rabbits, such as children take to bed with them. Thus the manufacture of realistic animal toys coincides, more or less, with the establishment of public zoos. The family visit to the zoo is often a more sentimental occasion than a visit to a fair or a football match. Adults take children to the zoo to show them the originals of their reproductions, and also perhaps in the hope of refinding some of the innocence of that reproduced animal world which they remember from their own childhood. The animals seldom live up to the adults' memories, whilst to the children they appear, for the most part, unexpectedly lethargic and dull. As frequent as the calls of animals in a zoo, or the cries of children demanding, "Where is he? Why doesn't he move? Is he dead?" And so one might summarize the felt, but not necessarily expressed question of most visitors as, "Why are these animals less than I believed?" And this unprofessional, unexpressed question is the one worth answering. A zoo is a place where as many species and varieties of animal as possible are collected in order that they can be seen, observed, studied. In principle, each cage is a frame round the animal inside it. Visitors visit the zoo to look at animals. They proceed from cage to cage, not unlike visitors in an art gallery who stop in front of one painting and then move on to the next or the one after next. Yet in the zoo the view is always wrong, like an image out of focus. One is so accustomed to this that one scarcely notices it anymore, or rather the apology habitually anticipates the disappointment so that the latter is not felt. And the apology runs like this: "What do you expect? It's not a dead object you have come to look at, it's alive. It's leading its own life. Why should this coincide with its being properly visible?" Yet, the reasoning of this apology is inadequate. The truth is more startling. However you look at these animals, even if the animal is up against the bars, less than a foot from you looking outwards in the public direction, you are looking at something that has been rendered absolutely marginal, and all the concentration you can muster will never be enough to centralize it. Why is this? Within limits, the animals are free, but both they themselves and their spectators presume on their close confinement. The visibility through the glass, the spaces between the bars, or the empty air above the moat are not what they seem. If they were, then everything would be changed. Thus visibility, space, air have been reduced to tokens. The decor, accepting these elements as tokens, sometimes reproduces them to create pure illusion, as in the case of painted prairies or painted rock pools at the back of the boxes for small animals. Sometimes it merely adds further tokens to suggest something of the animal's original landscape: the dead branches of a tree for monkeys, artificial rocks for bears, pebbles, and shallow water for crocodiles. These added tokens serve two distinct purposes. For the spectator, they are like theater props. For the animal, they constitute the bare minimum of an environment in which they can physically exist. The animals, isolated from each other and without interaction between species, have become utterly dependent upon their keepers. Consequently, most of their responses have been changed.